let me introduce Bijay. So Bijay is a podcast mentor. Of course, he doesn't need an introduction, but he's a podcast mentor, and I'm sure you have heard about the Inspiring Talk. He had been hosting it for the past 3 years, and it's such a proud feeling to say that he had also been a finalist in the Asia's Best Podcast Awards, and he is the co-founder at Wine Studio. So, hello Vijay, how are you doing today?
All good, Asna. So I think these are the folks on Instagram. People on Instagram, can you guys hear me all right? Just give a thumbs up if you guys can hear me all right. People on Instagram, if you guys can hear me all right, just give me a thumbs up. And people on the Facebook and LinkedIn, if you guys can hear me, just give me a thumbs up on the chat box. That would be awesome to know if you guys can hear me all right. Awesome. Thank you, Deepak. Thank you so much for that. Super. So if you guys on Instagram, if you guys can hear me all right, just give a thumbs up. And also the people on Facebook and other platform, just give a thumbs up if you guys can hear me all clear and if I'm audible and if you guys can hear me all right. Yeah. Awesome. I'm doing good, Asna. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sure people can hear us. I've been seeing a lot of thumbs up. So let's dive into it straight. Let's begin
Yeah.
with the questions. Okay.
Awesome.
So here I'm going to ask you the most asked questions about podcasting.
Mm-hmm.
These are the most asked questions on the internet. And we'll be asking the questions, but we also welcome questions from you guys. You can also ask questions from us. Okay, so the first question is, why do you think audio podcasts are powerful medium when everyone is talking about videos nowadays? I mean,
Awesome.
videos.
Yeah. So yeah, before I answer that, right? So for a lot of people who are joining this call, as Asna said, if you guys have any questions, so this is where this is a live Q&A interactive session which we are doing, where if you want to know anything about podcasting, on how to create the podcast or how to monetize the podcast, how to grow the audience, or anything that has got to do with podcast, whether you are existing podcaster or someone who is just looking at getting started with podcast, and if you have anything that you'd like to ask, please put them on the chat box and I will try and answer your questions on the chat box. So I'll do that. So yes, so why audio in the world of video? I think that's how many of you have that question, by the way? Just raise your hand if you guys also have the question that, you know what, but this is the world of video. You guys are even on the Instagram live. It's a video platform. Just, raise your hands and just put the, hand emoji on the chat box if you guys feel that, you guys also have this question, like, this is the world of video. Everybody is talking about the visual medium, right? Why audio? Like, why, are people even listening to audio, right? To answer that, I will say that, audio and video medium, I don't look at them as a competitive medium. Okay, I don't look at like which one is better. Is audio better or video better? And the reason for that is both of these medium are totally different medium. And the reason I say that both of these medium are different medium is because audio as a medium is something that you listen to when you don't have time. And video as a medium is medium that you watch when you have time. Let me explain that, okay? So you listen to podcast when you are, cooking or cleaning, or when you are doing your dishes, or maybe walking your dog, or working out, or, you could be doing something else on top of listening to podcast. Right? But when do you listen to video? When do you watch videos? You watch video when you have time, which means you are relaxed at your home, and then that's when you watch the video, right? So that's the basic fundamental difference, right? Just get this. Your podcast listeners are not, they're just laying down on their bed and then just listening to your podcast. They are doing something, right? So that's one of the reason why, this medium are fundamentally different, right? That's one. And second is, so I have got a question for you guys who are joining me on the live right now. I want you guys to answer this question. What was the average time, or what was the amount of time that you guys spent on reading the blog post last time? Just put that time on the chat box. I would love to see what was the length that you spent on reading one blog post. 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. What was the average time that you spend in reading a blog post? Put that on the chat box. I'd love to know what is the average time that you usually spend to read a blog post, right? That's usually for the visual medium, which is a blog post. A lot of people spend not more than 5 to 7 minutes at max, right? 5 minutes is like a max time that a lot of people spend on blog posts, right? So you can see Sumona Digital is saying that it's 5 minutes, right? Usually it's 5 to 7 minutes for a blog post. How about video? Someone else is saying like maximum 5 minutes. Someone is saying like 7 minutes, right? Someone is saying like 2 minutes. I can't read more than 2 minutes, right? Now, what about video? Now, think about what is the average time that you give for one video that you watch on your YouTube, right? And again, for the video as well, it can go maybe up to 7 minutes, up to 10 minutes, right? That's like 10 minutes is an average. That totally depends on, obviously it depends on the content as well, but we're talking about the average, right? If you look at the average for the video that you watch on YouTube, it's usually 10 minutes, right? Now, think about this about podcast. What do you guys think? What do you guys think would be the average time that listeners spend in listening to podcasts? Take a guess. Put it on the chat box. I want you guys to make this like as interactive as possible. Yeah. So I'm going to answer your questions as well. So average time that people consume the podcast is like 30 minutes. Isn't that crazy that people are tuning in for 30 minutes to listen to podcasts? And that's one of the reasons that podcast is one of the really, really engaging medium, because people don't have the visual distraction. When you are in YouTube, you have all sort of visual distraction, right? You have like a recommended video, and there is the ad that pops in, and all sort of visual clutter. And unfortunately, that breaks the attention on the content that you are consuming, right? So that's the reason why people are more engaged to audio as a medium as well, right? So 30 minutes is like an average time that a lot of people listen to podcasts, because they are doing something on top of listening to audio. That's the second one, right? The third one is, from the perspective of creators, if you are someone who is not, someone who is very comfortable, if you're not very comfortable on the screen, then that's your medium, right? You don't have to be on screen. You don't have to put your face on the screen. And a lot of people come across to me and say that, you know what, Bijay, I just can't be on screen. Then do podcast, create podcast, because you don't have to be, on the screen, right? So that's another reason on why podcast. So those are the three top reasons on why audio in the world of video. Yeah, awesome. So I think you guys have questions. You can put them on the chat box, but Asna will keep asking her the questions as well. But I would be more than happy to answer the questions that you guys might have as well.
That's super cool. I really enjoyed that answer. So the next question is, what are a few things people should keep in mind when they are thinking of starting a podcast?
Oh yeah. So this one is interesting, right? So in fact, there is a question that Neha asked, like, what is the platform that I should use? And somebody asking, which mic should I buy? I'm looking at starting the podcast. What platform should I host it on? Where should I distribute? And these are the questions that people usually ask me, right? And I'm definitely going to answer all of those questions as well, where I'm going to answer all those questions on, what mic to use, where to, broadcast it, and all those different questions. I'm definitely going to answer those questions. But I want to bring attention to the people who are watching us live right now to the fact that there are three things that I always talk about that you need to have absolute clarity of if you are starting a podcast. Okay, let me run through these three things that I want you guys to have absolute clarity of if you are looking at doing the podcast, right? The first thing is, why do you want to do it? And this is very important question to ask, like, what is the objective of doing the podcast? Is it because you want to grow your influence? Is it because you want to get access to really successful people? Or is it because you want to grow your business? Or is it because you want to build your personal brand? Like, what's your reason? Why do you want to even do a podcast? Right? Maybe you have been through some challenges in your life, and because you have been through some tough phase in your life, you have a story to share with the world, and then that story can help other people to overcome the similar challenge in their life, right? So is that your why, right? So that's the first question that you need to have clarity of if you are thinking of doing a podcast. Like, why do you want to do it? The second thing is, who is your audience? Now, this is a very, very important. I think if you are thinking of doing a podcast, like this second thing, which is who is your audience, probably is the most important thing that you need to have clarity of if you're looking at doing a podcast, right? Because unless you understand who your audience is, you don't understand what are the challenges of your audience are. And when you don't understand the challenge and problem of your audience, then you can never serve your audience with your content, right? As simple as that. So if you want to serve your audience, if you want to add value to your audience, you need to understand who they are. And that's the second thing that you need to have absolute clarity of. And that's the second thing that you need to know before starting a podcast. The third thing that you need to know about, that you need to have absolute clarity of when it comes to podcasting, is how you are going to make your show unique. Like, let's say you want to do a podcast on marketing or entrepreneurship, right? And then your idea might be, okay, I'm going to talk to all these entrepreneurs and, just record the interviews and put it out there. But how is it going to be different from other entrepreneurship show? Then you need to have clarity of how my podcast stands out from all these other marketing podcasts or entrepreneurship podcasts. What is the unique thing about my show? And you need to define that. And that uniqueness could be your own style. And that uniqueness could be the fact that you have this uncanny ability to break down the complex information and make it into a simple information, right? Or that unique thing could be that you are going narrow down, or you saying like, I'm going to do entrepreneurship based podcast, but only in Gujarati or Hindi or Tamil or Marathi, or you can go on a local and regional language, right? So that could be your uniqueness about your podcast, right? So you need to have, this is the third thing that you need to have clarity of when you are doing the podcast, right? So the first thing, you need to know why you are doing it. When you have more clarity, that is something that drives you to continue doing it. And you need to be absolutely passionate about it. And the second thing is, who is it for, who your audience is. Third thing, and what's the unique thing that you're bringing on the table, how you are going to differentiate yourself from a lot of other people that are creating the similar kind of shows. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, that's super cool. Okay, so let's move on to the third question. What are some of the biggest myths about creating a podcast that people have?
Wow. So the first myth that a lot of people have when it comes to creating a podcast is people think that for you to create a podcast, you need to have a amazing voice. You need to have an amazing voice. That's the biggest one, right? A lot of people come to me saying that, Bijay, you know what, I would like to start a podcast, but I don't have a great voice. At least I feel that way, that I don't have a great voice, right? So that's a lot of people do have that. Now, here's the thing, right? Nobody loves their voice, recorded voice. And especially if you're listening to your voice for the first time, recorded voice for the first time, it feels really awkward. And then, you really don't like your voice, right? So it's not only you, but everyone go through that phase where you record a voice and listen to it for the first time, and you feel like, oh, I sound really bad. So yeah, I mean, that's totally normal to feel that way, where I don't have a great voice. That's one. And second, do I need to know all this voice modulation and so on and so forth to do a simple podcast, right? Maybe most of the people are looking at doing either interview-based podcast or solo podcast. Do I need to know all this all these voice modulation techniques? And I know, but I can't speak like a RJ and so on and so forth. And I usually ask people, hey, imagine this, right? You are having conversation with person A, and then whosoever that person is, like that person A, and what would you prefer? Like, let's say, okay, Neha is laughing. They're sending the emoji there. Okay, let me take an example of Neha. Let's say I'm having conversation with Neha on my podcast. Let's say, what would you guys prefer? Okay, I'm going to give you two options. Option A, all right, ladies and gentlemen, we have Neha here on my podcast, The Inspiring Talk. Neha is an amazing person. That's option A. And the option B is, hey guys, today I'm joined by Neha. She's a very, very good friend of mine. And, today we are going to talk about so-and-so. A or B, which one do you prefer, right? There you go, right? A lot of people who are listening to your podcast, they are not expecting you to be a radio jockey so that, and they can't relate to you, right? So they are looking at another human on the other side of the microphone. And you can continue to be human when you keep your authenticity up there on the microphone, right? So it's always better that you keep your authenticity out there and you be who you are as a person on the podcast as well, rather than trying to be someone else. And people would love that. So that's why you don't have to master all these voice modulation and stuff, unless you are doing a storytelling podcast or narrative podcast. That's a whole different thing. But if you're having a conversational podcast, then it needs to be conversational, right? So that's the second myth that a lot of people do have. And the third myth that do people have is like, it's too technical, and I don't think I'll be able to do it. But I mean, that's not true either. Now technology makes it much easier for people to just create podcasts from their phone. So yeah, I think we should take some of the
That's
questions from the audience as well.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think
I think we
Bidula
have a few
on
here in chat.
Instagram. Yeah, maybe you can also put the questions on the Facebook on the screen. But on Instagram, Bidula asked, "What should be the frequency of podcast?" So Bidula, the short answer to that is I would say weekly if you can. But just to elaborate a little bit on that, it should really be something that you are comfortable with, because at the end of the day, it's you who are going to put time to create your podcast, right? If you are comfortable putting out, and if you think that you have time to produce the podcast every single week, then go ahead and do it, right? If you think you can do more frequently, do it more frequently. But you think you will not be able to keep up with the weekly or maybe twice a week kind of a frequency, then maybe you can do 2 a month. But the key here is to whatever frequency you pick, you need to be consistent. You need to be consistent with whatever frequency you pick up with, right? Awesome. Neha says, do we need voice modulation if it's a motivational podcast? So fortnightly sounds perfectly okay, Vidula. So do we need to have voice modulation if it's a motivational podcast? Now, it depends on what kind of motivational podcast is it, right? Now, if it's just again, it depends on the tone, right? In understanding who your audience is, right? If you think your audience is someone whom you'd like to have a casual conversation with, let's say young audience, then in that case, even if you use the casual tone, keeping your audience in mind, that will work, right? And if you think like it's going to be more of a storytelling format, then that's where you want to probably use the voice modulation as well to bring that emotions on the content as well, right? So yeah, what should be the duration of a podcast? Again, there is no ideal duration to the content of podcast content. So at Wine Studio, we have a podcast as short as 10 minutes, and we do have a podcast as long as like 90 minutes, right? So we do a bunch of shows from 10 minutes to 90 minutes, and we do have audience for all kind of shows. So it totally depends on what kind of content that you are producing, and whatever the length of your show is, you should always keep in mind, like, is it interesting enough for the audience to stick till the end of the show? And it's not that first you decide the length of your show and then go and decide on the content. It should be other way around, where you first see what is the content, and then let the content decide what is going to be the length of your episode. Yeah. Awesome.
So my radiant soul asked the question, which is my next question. I've got you covered, my radiant soul. He asked about what is the equipment required to start a podcast, the basic equipment.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
So for someone who is just getting started, and if you just want to test the waters, and let's say, okay, I just looking at getting started with podcast, I just want to test podcast as a medium. The simplest way to do is, you can download an Anchor app on your phone, and then boom, by the time we are done with this live, you can have your podcast up and running. Okay. By the time we end this live, you will have your podcast up and running. All you have to do is just download this app called Anchor on your phone, and then you can use the microphone of your phone and then record it and then put it out there, right? As simple as that. But if you want to do a bit of a professional stuff and you want to involve your laptop and the softwares and so on and so forth, you can use the free recording software like Audacity and GarageBand on your laptop, and then you can use the microphones you can use the microphone like Audio Technica ATR 2100, and also you get a bunch of microphones from Blue and so on and so forth. You connect the microphone on your laptop, and then boom, you record, and then and you can even edit on Audacity and add music and do a bit of a post production and so on and so forth. And then and these are some of the things that you can use, right? So if you're using from phone, just download Anchor. If you're just testing waters, and it's the easiest way to do. However, for somebody looking at doing it professionally, I don't recommend just doing it from your phone and stuff, because you would like to maintain the quality of the thing, right? So in that case, then I would recommend to get some microphone, so that will really enhance your audio quality. Yeah. Awesome.
Thanks. So, as we are working remotely, because hello, COVID, I have a question on that.
Yeah.
How do you record a remote podcast interview?
Oh, awesome. Yeah. So now that a lot of people ask me, you know what, I would like to record. So I would like to record interviews, but I'm locked at home. My guest is at home. How do I do the podcast interviews and so on and so forth, right? So we do a lot of podcast interviews here at Wine Studio, and we use few platforms. So one is you can use like Zoom, right? Zoom is the simplest one, and everybody know how to use it. And then right now, like almost everyone has got it, right? So you can use Zoom, or you can even use Google Meet, right? Or Google Hangout, right? So you can either use that one, or if you want more podcast specific platforms which are meant to be meant to be used for podcast, then you can use the tool called Zencaster, Zencastr. That's a Zencaster. Or you can use, there is another platform called Squadcast, Squadcast. Both of these platforms record high quality audio. So, both of these record like a really high quality audio, and then you can use any of these platforms to record your remote interviews from your laptop, and you should sound awesome. Brigadier Vasin is saying like, awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining on the call. Really appreciate that. By the way, Brigadier Sushil Vasin has got a podcast on Spotify. Do check his podcast out. It's an amazing on the career podcast. Brilliant job. Yeah, awesome. Squadcast, not Squad Podcast. It's Squadcast. Yeah. So Brigadier Vasin is saying, I record professional podcast for Spotify on Audacity every week on Audacity. It's easy. There you go. There is the man who is 65 young, 65 years young, who is saying that Audacity is easy. Then, rest of you guys, you don't have an excuse to say that, it's difficult to create a podcast. Okay. Brigadier Vasin, he is there, and he is 65. There you go. Zindagi Unplugged on Spotify. Check his podcast out. Awesome.
Awesome. So my next question is,
what 69. Oh, wow. 69. Awesome. Great.
Okay, cool. So my next question is, as I was saying, what are some ways to market your podcast?
Awesome. Okay, so for the people who are doing interview, it's much easier for you to increase your show audience, because when you interview someone, you have your guests, right? And you have your guests, and it's much easier for you to ask your guests to go ahead and promote your podcast, right? So that's what you do, right? So when you interview someone, make it easier for your guests to promote that episode. Now, what do I mean by making it easy for your guests to promote that episode is by creating the creatives and sending them all this creative, sending them images, and sending them even the copy, right? Hey, I was on let's say whatever your show, the name of the podcast, and then here is the creative, right? You just email them those creatives so that they can go ahead and share it with their audience, right? That's one. Second is you can collaborate with other podcasters. There are so many other podcasters who are creating the podcast just like you. Reach out to them and tell them, hey, I can interview you, you can interview me, and then you just collaborate with other podcasters, so that when you collaborate with other, what happens is some of your listeners will go and check their podcast out. Some of their listeners will come and check your podcast out, and it's a win-win situation for all of you, right? So, and also the third thing that you can do is to repurpose your podcast content. And this is the most underutilized way to promote the podcast right now, where a lot of people are not repurposing the podcast content. And what I mean by repurposing your podcast content is you have recorded that audio, just put a small banner on it, and then take the audio and put it on YouTube. YouTube is the second biggest uh, podcast listening platform, right? Sorry, second biggest search engine right now. And if you just create a visual and then just put an audio and put it on YouTube, it's going to get a good exposure there on YouTube as well, right? And also the another thing that you can do is out of that, just podcasting, just maybe take 1 minute of audio clip and then create a creative and then put it on Instagram, right? You can check our One Studios page, how we repurpose our content, right? How are we promoting our podcast on Instagram? And even you can check on my page how I promote my show, right? So you can create those creatives, and also you can create write a nice little blog, right? Summarize all the points that you have discussed on your podcast, write a nice little blog, or maybe just a LinkedIn article and put it on your LinkedIn, and bring all these people back to your podcast. Ask them, guys, if you'd like to learn more, hear more, see more, whatever it is, go ahead and find me on find the show on Spotify or Apple Podcast, or wherever your podcast is, right? So I think that's those are some of the quick hacks on growing your podcast audience.
Super cool. Cool. So I noted two questions from our listeners. They
Okay.
are, how long should it be for a personal branding podcast? What should be the duration for a personal branding podcast?
Okay, so I think that's again, that totally depends, right? As I said, right? So let's take an example, right? We do a podcast called Can Inspire, which is one of our shows here at Wine Studio, right? So it can inspire some episodes like go up to 50 minutes, and some episodes are like 15-20 minutes long. And why is it that? Why is it that some episodes are 20 minutes long and why some episodes are like 50 minutes long? The only reason for that is because that content only demands that kind of time. And that should be your answer for the length as well. Like your length of the podcast should be as much as your content demands, right? It should not be a minute more and it should not be a minute less, period. Like just because you decided that you're going to have your podcast is a 20-minute long podcast, don't extend 5 minute worth of content and make it 20-minute long. And just because you decided that your podcast is going to be 20-minute long, don't condense your 60 minutes of information and make it like a 20-minute long podcast. It doesn't work that way, right? Do justice to the content and just keep the length as it requires, right? So the same goes with my own show, right? So the show that I host, the Inspiring Talk, the shortest episode is 29-minute long and the longest is like 90 minutes long, right? And why it's some episode 90 and why is some episode 29? It's because that's what the content demands, and that's how so it should be as long as it needs to be for any form of content, right? So yeah, that would be my quick response.
Yeah, totally. I agree. Okay. So somebody asked for some platform suggestions
Okay,
to start a podcast.
okay, if you are looking at starting a podcast, so let's understand, what does a platform even mean here, right? So what is a platform? So the platform that are involved in this are, one is the distribution platform, which means where people listen to your podcast, right? These are Apple Podcast, Spotify, JioSaavn, and so on and so forth, right? So these are the places where people listen to your podcast. These are the platforms where you should distribute your podcast, right? JioSaavn, Apple Podcast, Ghana, and so on and so forth. These are the places where you can even see, if you are watching us on Facebook, you can even see the places where you can listen to our podcast, right? So yeah, so you can look at these are the platforms where you distribute your podcast. But this is not where you upload the MP3 of your podcast. Where do you upload the MP3? You upload it on something called as media host. Okay, then what are some of the media hosts? Then some of the media hosts, like as I mentioned earlier, like if you want to go with the easiest one, like it's an Anchor, which you get download on the phone, and then boom, there you go, right? Or if you want to go with some paid media hosting platforms, then you can go with one called Podbean, Podbean. Podbean, that's like a really good one. You can go with Buzzsprout, you can go with Libsyn, you can go with Blueberry, you can go with any of these different platforms, right? But if you want to go for free, Anchor is there. If you want to go with the paid, my favorite is Podbean. So you can go with any of these. So that would be, that's where you upload your MP3. And from this platform, you distribute it to all other different places.
Okay, cool. So it's about time now. We would have to wrap up the session. Are there any more
Uh,
questions from you guys?
yeah. So I think we'll take questions before we close this call. So if you guys have questions, just put them on the chat box. We'd be more than happy to answer your questions. 30 minutes, and I love that the energy is still awesome in the room. Um, all right. I hope you guys are learning few stuff about podcasting. And if you are stuck, if you want to learn something, if you have questions, put them on the chat box. We'd be happy to take them and answer the questions that you guys might have. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question.
Okay. Go ahead.
So my last question is, do you have any advice for the budding podcasters or people who want to start podcast? Any advice for them?
Yes, there is a biggest advice. Okay. There is a biggest advice that I want to give to all the podcasters who are all the aspiring podcasters or people who are looking at getting started with the podcast. You know what the biggest advice is? Just start it. So that's the biggest advice that I can give to you guys. Don't overthink. Just go ahead and start your podcast, because this is the perfect time to get into podcasting. And with all the incredible things happening around the podcasting landscape, there could have been no better time to get started with the podcast. So I think that would be my biggest tip, that start your podcast and start it as soon as you can. So I think that would be my biggest suggestion, because a lot of time we keep thinking, we keep postponing, and we keep making all these sort of excuses, but that's not helping you, right? If you really want to do it, put it, and then just go ahead and do it. Okay. Awesome. So, how to make call to action? I'm assuming that you are saying, like, how do I make the call to action at the end of my podcast episode? Mayur, maybe you can elaborate that question. But from what I understood, you can make the call to action at the end of your episode, saying that, hey guys, thank you for listening to my show. I'm your host, Mayur. If you guys want to find more about me, just go to, whatever, mayurnjani.com, if that's your website, or just go ahead and leave a review, because that helps my show to be discovered by more people. That could be your call to action. Or you can say, hey, if you love what you're listening, I also do incredible things on my Instagram, go ahead and check me out on Instagram, right? You can do call to action depending on the tone of your show, and then you can really do it for your audience the way that you think is going to be interesting for your audience. Yeah. Shubham asked this.
Yeah. Hello.
All right. Can you guys hear me? Is that my internet or
Yes.
Asna's internet? I hope now we are
Yes.
back.
Yes.
But yeah. Yeah. So, how many podcasts before they start getting attention? Before they start, attention. How about this, right? Okay. So while it's really it totally depends on the niche that you are in and the kind of content that you are creating, right? It doesn't matter if you are not creating really good content. It doesn't matter even if you have hundreds of episodes. So that's why if you have figured out those three things that I mentioned in the beginning, right? If you know who your audience is, if you know why you are doing it, and if you know the unique thing about your show and it stands out, then usually it takes like 10 to 15 episodes, and people start to notice it, and they start talking to other people about the show. So if you're doing, let's say, a season of 12 to 13 episodes, then at least it takes a season for people to start even talking about it, and then it starts to start getting attention from the audience. So I think that would be my quick answer. But again, like, if you are creating something as magical as the one that we produce here at the Wine Studio, which is Here's of the Pandavas, maybe Asna can probably show it on the screen. I think it's somewhere around there. So if you're creating something as magical as Here's of the Pandava, the show that we have created, right? So we are getting incredible response even with the first 5 episodes of the show, right? It totally depends on the content, on how amazing the content is, so that that's how soon you can get started with then that's when you get started getting some attention. Okay. All right. So Yeah. Any other questions, guys? Any last question? Maybe I'll take one last question. Yeah, Asna, what do you think?
Yeah, so we had a question from somebody. They asked, how can we gain followers?
Again, I think we discussed about we discussed about the ways to grow the audience, right? So I think there's an interesting one, which is how to prepare questions to interview my guest. I think I'll take that one. That's an interesting one, right? A lot of people are now, doing the interview-based podcast. So, if you're looking at doing the interviewing the person, a lot of people think that I can wing it. Like I'm a really good conversationalist. I can go and like just nail it, right? If you have that kind of approach, then you usually end up doing just a regular conversation and you won't like really get into the depth of the stuff, right? So if you really want to get into the depth of it, if you really want to make a conversation that is really meaningful and that is something that your audience find extreme value in, then for that you need to prepare well. And for that, like one, like you just go and find everything that you can find about them on social media, or Google, right? And then listen to other podcast interviews they have been part of and what are the kind of questions they have been asked, and then just try and see what are their responses are, and if you can pick something interesting from the response that they have given, and that could be probably your question, right? So that's another thing that you can do. And the third thing is, if you want to take this to the next level, then you can probably even pick up the phone call and have a quick call with them and to outline the conversation with your guest. That really helps you in planning the podcast really well, right? Awesome.
Yeah. Okay, so
Do
this
you
was the last
post only one
question.
podcast monthly? May we know why you decided for the monthly one? Is there any secret strategy? No, we don't have a monthly podcast. We do, most of our shows are weekly. So we do weekly shows. Yeah, awesome. So I would love to just have a quick feedback on the chat box from you guys on what do you think of this live? Do you guys think we should do this more often? Do you guys think it was valuable for you guys? I think now Asna is saying that it's time now. We decided for 30 minutes. It's now already 36 now. So what do you guys think? We should do it more often because this is an international podcast month. So September is observed as an international podcast month. So I think, if you guys think this was valuable for you guys, then we might even think of doing more of these.
Yes, please, guys, leave your suggestions down below. People
Yeah,
are saying
awesome.
yes. Okay, sure. We'll be coming up with a lot more then.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Awesome. Really appreciate that.
Thank you,
Thank you, guys. We're
everyone,
going
for
to do
joining
this more
us.
often and we'll keep you posted on this. So just follow the Wine Studio page so that you can stay updated with all the. So I want all of you to just quickly, follow the Wine Studio page right now so that you get updated with all the upcoming live that we're going to go do. So this is just awesome, guys. Thank you so much for joining us on the live. Really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Asna.
Thank
You
you
have
so
been an
much. It
amazing
was,
host.
and thank you, Vijay. Thank you, Vijay. It was a wonderful live session with you. Okay, guys.
Awesome.
See you again.